The cheapest way to control your attention is to make you believe that absolute evil is lurking around every corner. Your brain loves mysticism because it strips it of responsibility for its own misery. Do you still believe that inquisitors genuinely hunted demons? I am Ingvar Geller, first investigator for the Holy Chancellery, and my job is to prove that every manifestation of the devil always has a specific name, a surname, and a signature on a debt receipt. 2 months ago, madness consumed a quiet valley in the Vosges. The Abbey of St. Vitus, which for centuries survived by selling honey and wool, suddenly transformed into a branch of hell. At night, dead cows with severed tongues were found near the monastery walls, and the local reservoir turned the color of rust. The abbot, Father Benedict, flooded Paris with letters. "We are besieged by witches. The land is cursed. We cannot pay the tithe to the king. Everything goes toward defending the holy shrines." The Grand Inquisitor sent me there with one short note. Find out why God has suddenly become so expensive to maintain. I arrived in the valley at sunset. A thick, suffocating fear hung over the monastery. Peasants were nailing boards over their windows, and 3 bonfires were already smoking in the square. The abbot, with tears in his eyes, told me how they had caught an old beggar woman who cursed the cattle. But as I glanced at the monastery gates, my cold, investigative intellect clicked. The expensive oil on the brand new iron hinges hadn't even dried yet, and the monks, supposedly starving from the curse, were hauling sacks of premium wheat into the cellars. At that exact moment, I opened the first loop in my mind. This didn't smell like brimstone. It smelled like high-level fraud. Any perfect report about the fight against evil crumbles if you know how to look where looking is forbidden. I refused the luxurious cell offered to me and stayed overnight in the court chancellery, pretending to study the confessions of witches. Father Benedict claimed that the witches operated in covens, and their names were revealed by God himself during prayer. But numbers on a page don't know how to pray. They only know how to lie. I took the registries of confiscated property from the past month and cross-referenced them with the land grid. On paper, it looked like holy purification. But in reality, a bizarre pattern emerged. The moment a local craftsman or the widow of a wealthy miller dared to whisper that the abbey was overcharging for land taxes, their relative was dragged into the dungeons 3 days later. The answer to where the evidence came from arrived at 3 in the morning. Staking out the rear yard of the monastery slaughterhouse, I heard the faint screech of a wagon. Monks in black work aprons were unloading the carcasses of those very same cursed cows. I moved closer once they left. There were no demonic teeth marks on the animals' necks, only clean, precise incisions made by a professional butcher's knife. The abbot was slaughtering his own parishioners' cattle to simulate an epidemic and justify the arrests of those who still had gold. It was a flawless conveyor belt. Engineer a crisis, terrify them to death, and then, amidst the panic, strip the frightened herd of their last assets as payment for salvation. I needed the core element of this puzzle. Why do they confess? What makes a human being on the rack scream that they flew to a Sabbath and drank blood? In the morning, I descended into the cellar where they were interrogating Elsa, the daughter of the very miller whose lands the abbey had unsuccessfully tried to buy for 3 years. The judge read the indictment, using complex Latin terminology that completely shut down the peasant girl's critical thinking. To her, this esoteric jargon sounded like the verdict of fate itself. But I wasn't looking at the judge. I was watching a small brazier in the corner where a monk was heating a strange, dark brown liquid. The scent was sweet and intoxicating. Ergot extract mixed with black opium. A microscopic dose of this toxin, administered to the prisoner with water before the interrogation, triggers severe tachycardia, hallucinations, and a state of raw, uncontrollable horror. The mind falls into a trance trap of its own subconscious. When the executioner asks, "Did you see the devil?" the poisoned brain, overloaded with pain and neurotoxins, paints the horned shadows on the damp walls itself. Elsa screamed and nodded, signing with her thumbprint a document that transferred her father's entire mill and arable land to the Abbey for the absolution of sins. Clean, dry biochemistry. No magic, just pharmacology, terror, and a perfectly calculated timeline.
With these documents, I entered the private quarters of Father Benedict. The Holy Father was not praying. He sat before an open iron chest, packed to the brim with silver thalers, heavy gold chains, and land deeds. I silently dropped the torn ledger page and the vial of opium extract onto his table. An ordinary man would have fallen to his knees. Benedict merely chuckled softly, his hands never leaving the gold. "Ingvar, my son," he said, tossing a heavy coin in his palm. "You found the deception. How naive. Do you truly think Paris sent you here to protect the swine in the square? The king is waging war in Flanders. The treasury is hollow. If I do not send 5,000 livres to Paris by the end of the month, mercenaries will come and burn this valley to ash. And these peasants, they do not want to know that their gold buys swords and shields. It is easier for them to believe in witches. The fear of a witch makes them surrender their silver voluntarily with a prayer on their lips. My bonfires are simply an efficient financial instrument. Do you wish to disrupt this order? Do you want to tell them the truth?" He pulled a heavy leather pouch from the chest, filled with at least 300 gold écus, and slid it toward me. I looked out the window. Down below, in the freezing sleet, the mob was roaring with delight, watching the torch touch the dry straw beneath the feet of the weeping Elsa. Look at them. Your inner voice, right now, at this very second, is desperately trying to distance itself from this horror. Your ego whispers, "That was a dark age. Things are different now. We have evolved." But take off your rose-colored glasses and look into the mental mirror. The wiring of your reticular formation hasn't changed since the 17th century. The mechanisms for extracting your resources under the guise of manufactured threats, crises, and imaginary enemies have only become more elegant. They terrify you, trap you in a cognitive gestalt of guilt, and force you to pay. For safety, for stability, for the right to feel correct. Ask yourself one final question before your subconscious buries this discomfort. What kind of witch hunt is being staged before your eyes right now, just to make you obediently empty your pockets? The answer is already inside you. I took the abbot's gold, signed the report stating that heresy in the valley had been successfully eradicated, and left the abbey. The living will continue to pay for their illusions, and the dead have no use for gold. In the next episode, I will show you how the elites utilize the phenomenon of controlled famine to make entire cities voluntarily shackle themselves. Subscribe if you are ready to view this world without filters.